All right, part two in our series Building an iOS app with AI. And in the first part, we covered all the basics. So, all the tools and programs you need to download, a brief explanation what they are, and also how to use them in very basic terms, just enough to have you go ahead and build your first screens only using AI, only using natural language. And now you could probably go ahead and vibe code your way to your first app. And maybe you should actually do that and go ahead and try that out. But today, I want to show you workflow that I follow, a process that's actually quite close to real product development, but fully leveraging AI. And at points, it's quite important to stick to the basics here because with vibe coding, at some point, you will hit a wall. And there could be that you find yourself in a loop trying to instruct the AI to get the exact design that you want. There could be building a spaghetti code that you cannot recover from. There's probably many ways that this could go wrong, but taking it step by step ensures you that you have a little bit of a future-proof app. And in general, I follow the principle a lot, and I think in this channel and building with AI that applies a lot. It's called the Pareto principle. The idea that with just 20% of effort, you'll get 80% of the results. And of course, the idea is not here to exert too much effort and to waste our time. We still want to be efficient. But the truth here is, why be lazy and cut it short at 10% if just 20% give you a shot at a real app, an app with a future, and an app to be proud of? So let's look at the workflow that I follow to ideate and come up with good designs, and then how to instruct Cursor to put these designs into actual development. Everything starts with an idea, and you might have a great idea, but then the question is, how the hell do I implement this? How the hell do I make this into an app? And this is the very first step. And there's different steps that we will go through. And the truth is that as a non-technical person building apps, you don't only need to leverage AI for this last part, for the coding part, the cursor part, but we can leverage AI for all the different steps of the process. This might be in the very beginning of brainstorming ideas and a back and forth with ChatGPT, something that you might be more familiar with, but also for other processes like design, something that we'll look a little bit more into today. And the best is probably to look at a real example today so we can go through step by step and understand how we leverage AI for these processes and how do we end up with a good design and with a quality outcome for our app. And the app that I want to use today as an example is an app that I built called Wham. And similar to the alarm app that we had in the first part, this is also an alarm app, but it's an alarm app based on distance and not on time. So think about it, you're commuting in the train and you want to be woken up when you're approaching your destination and not depending on a specific time. So this app will wake you up looking at the distance to a destination and then ring the alarm. Not that it's important, but it helps to understand. Because the first part here, as you see, is what should the app do? And this is part of the ideation phase. Here, the word requirements is important, and the basic concept might be straightforward. Yes, we have an alarm that should wake you up based on distance, but requirements become really important because the clearer we are on what we want, the better the app will be. In this part, the ideation part, this is where your input is really important. And of course, you might be at a blank page. So the beginning is all about inspiration. Here, it helps a lot that I'm a product manager and I worked a lot with different apps. But the truth is, everyone can really develop an eye for it. So just download a bunch of apps, be curious, try to learn different patterns on how apps work and how people implement their ideas into mobile apps. But there's also other websites like uWizard, Banani, or Mobbin. So online websites where you can go through screens and understand designs. So in this process, for example, I went ahead and I downloaded a bunch of alarm apps, or I looked online for screens and I tried to understand what are the current patterns. So this is something that I can show here. So I looked at a bunch of alarm apps, but one of the things that you will notice right away is that they're all pretty much based on time, right? But our alarm is based on distance. So the whole center of the time aspects here does not really apply for our app. But that's totally fine because we can also think outside the box and just look at other different apps. And in this case, it really helped that I'm clear on the requirements, right? And then we get back to this why it's so important to have the requirements. I wrote down the use cases that I want. So I want the user to be able to pick a destination. I want the user to be able to pick a distance, a proximity, and I want the user to be able to pick an alarm. And when it comes to this three-step and especially the where and the when, this is something where I thought about Airbnb, for example, or Booking.com, something more location-based. So I went ahead and I looked at some designs for Airbnb and Booking. And in this case, this is something very simplistic for an alarm app like ours that I very much like. And here we can go ahead, we can just take components and we can try to understand what we like and what we don't like. So I went ahead and used this Airbnb design and just modified it the way I needed. So for example, here, this nearby does make sense. Let's add a map in here. The where makes a lot of sense because we need to pick a destination. The when partially makes sense because we don't want to add dates, but we just want to add distance. So as you see, I created a little bit of a Frankenstein here, but this is totally fine because it's just about getting a rough idea of what I want this app to do. So I take the requirements and the use cases and I try to get inspired on different mobile apps and I build together my design of how I could picture this app to be looking like. And I know this might seem all very simplistic and easy and a little bit of a shortcut, but the most important here is to understand the process, that we need to start with clear requirement and use cases to get an understanding what we want the app to do, that we then go ahead and do a lot of research, that we try to understand different apps, that we try to have a back and forth with ChatGPT on the requirements that we want, to then in the end to be able to build our Frankenstein to visualize how we want our app to look like. So we can draw from other apps, and again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's plenty of apps out there, especially Airbnb with great design. So we just draw from different apps that we like, and we put ourselves to design together. And this is something that you could call traditionally a wireframe. And a wireframe usually is something drawn, and you can also go ahead and draw all of this. I personally like to take screenshots and put it together, but it's perfectly fine if you go ahead and draw this, as long as you have a clear understanding of this is more or less what the composition of my screen should look like. So going back to our little board here, we see that we have this ideate step and the tools that I told you, but also just go ahead and download a bunch of apps. In general, develop an eye for mobile apps and design, but also have a specific project in mind, go ahead and download similar apps. Now we go into the next step, which is design. And here I already mentioned a tool that is called Google Stitch. Stitch is a product from Google that is completely free to use and is a great way for you to use AI to create designs. And we can go ahead here and you see this is a chat window that you know that says describe your design. So you can go ahead and describe designs. What we want to do now in this case, we can take our wireframe here and take a screenshot. And we just paste it in here and ask to please implement this wireframe into a design. This might take some time, so I already went ahead and do this. And what we see is maybe after some iterations, you will arrive at really, really nice designs. And this is where we started. This is the wireframe, and this is what I got in the end. And sometimes it's not as easy. For example, if I were to go ahead and just describe, hey, please build me an alarm app based on distance, I might get something like this, which is not bad at all, but it's not quite hitting the requirements. And then there we come back to the idea of requirements, that I have a specific idea what I want the app to do. And the more specific I am instructing the AI, the easier. And these wireframes help me to be more specific to the AI and say, exactly like this, please implement. So we avoid having a bunch of options that we actually don't need, and we get to the point of what we want. And as you see that we have here in this process, the ideate design, and the wireframes were part of the ideate. Arguably, the wireframes are also part of the design. But in general, what we need to understand that these two steps are not really one after another. They're more something like this. They really connect to each other and they go back and forth. We might come up with an idea, put it into design, then realize, oh, we have a better idea, we want to tweak a little bit, and then we design, and so on. We do this until we have a final output, a final design that we like, and then we go into Cursor to instruct to implement it. And this is also why you can definitely go ahead and just start vibe designing in that sense, saying, build me an alarm app based on distance. And then you can go ahead and you see, okay, it's not quite what I want, but you can take elements and you can copy paste it into your Frankenstein. And then you can go to other apps and get inspired and incorporate this. And in the end, you will also arrive at a wireframe that you like. So again, this process is not a linear one. It's a back and forth. Google Stitch is a great tool for end designs, but it can also be a starting point. As long as you're very clear about your requirements and what you want, this is your human input. And these kind of Frankenstein's wireframes, whether they're like this or drawn, really help to instruct the AI exactly how to design it. And now for our last step, the development piece. In its basic form, it's again very straightforward. We go ahead and go to our design. We screenshot it. We go back to Cursor. We copy paste it and we instruct it, please help me implement this design. And we go ahead and let it run. And once it's done, we can go back to Xcode. We see the code that updated here. We ask to run the build, and we see how the app comes up. And it shows us a version of the app. And of course, it's not perfect when it comes to the logos here, probably some things that we want to change, but it's quite close. And from this point onwards, we just go ahead and iterate. We chat with Cursor, we say, please change your logo, please set this, please set this. And again, this is in its basic form. But of course, there's a lot more to it. There's probably a lot of videos on YouTube that explain how to best use Cursor, but I truly believe that 90% of all of this is really learning by doing. So you just go on Cursor and you chat back and forth. Be curious, try to learn, try to understand what is happening, and push Cursor to the limits. Sometimes there might be building errors. Sometimes this build will fail, and here it will show you an error. If this happens, you just copy paste it and you ask Cursor, please fix. If something doesn't go the way that you want, ask Cursor, why is it not working? So really push Cursor to the limits, always try to understand. And this is pretty much it. Maybe the only thing that I would say is an important rule is the better the input, the better the output. So this comes back to the requirements that we talked about. Be as clear and comprehensive as possible with the requirements. The better you instruct Cursor, the better the results will be. And then there's another part is try to figure out what you don't know. Sometimes it's hard to be clear with the requirements if you don't know what you don't know. So for this, Cursor has a plan and an ask mode. And this is something that I would encourage you to use a lot. So we have here, down here, we can choose the agent. This is the AI that will edit for you. But we also have a plan mode and an ask mode. At any moment, you can ask questions about the code, ask questions how to implement it best. And the plan mode is always great when you start. So for example, when you have a new feature that you want to implement, say, I want to implement this feature, plan with me. And what Cursor will do, it will ask you a bunch of questions and help you understand the requirements that you didn't know, you didn't specify. And again, there's a bunch to learn when it comes to Cursor. So you can go ahead, watch some YouTube videos about it. But in the end, I truly believe there's a lot of learning by doing. So go ahead and try to build your first projects. It's a lot more fun. And if you stay curious, you will learn along the way. For example, you will see that it's not always needed to always have a design attached here, that sometimes you can simply instruct Cursor, please add this feature, but you will get the hang of it. And you will see that sometimes it's a lot easier to iterate outside of Cursor and have a clear design that you want to implement. Sometimes it's not needed. And again, Cursor is as good, or AI is as good as the input that you give it. So sometimes it makes sense to put in a little bit of thought before, but sometimes you can just be time efficient and just go ahead. So that being said, go try it out, build your first projects. We managed to go through the entire process of all of our steps. The ideate, design, development, we understand that is a more cyclical process. And I gave you an overview of all the tools that you could be using in this process. So now go ahead, try it out. We went from our first screens to hopefully our first app. In the next part, I will show you if we have this app that we like, that we love, how do we get it to the App Store? How do we get it live so we can download it ourselves, send it to friends, maybe even monetize it? There's a few steps to it, but in the end, it's also quite straightforward. So catch you in the next one.